Before I got on this stage, one of my peers told me, don't forget, your mother is your people. So this is for my people. My mother's hands never tremble. I used to watch her stamp solid roots of cassava into fufu flour with them. First, outside, together with my aunts, stamping cassava into fufu with nothing but those bare hands of theirs. Later, when we arrived at the asylum-seeking center, my mother made fufu alone. One could say I come from a long line of women whose voices never shook, rather shook the spaces they walked into, whose hands and feet never trembled, but mine, it all abruptly started with me. I think I tremble because I'm afraid. I'm chronically afraid of unbelonging. See, I grew up not knowing what specific identity to subscribe to. And fellow writer Della Faye stood on this same stage asking her listeners the similar question. She said, I am a first-generation migrant. I am a third-culture kid. Am I rootless or am I free? I remember sitting behind my desktop, hearing these words speak to me and feeling my stomach drop to my knees. I did not know the answer to this question, but what I did know is that it had revealed an emptiness I had been seeking to fill inside. I was 5 years old when I first set foot on Dutch soil and stepped into its sharp February weather. I don't particularly recall if the tears in my eyes were from the cold this unknown land was blowing in my face or from the sorrow of the land we had just left behind. My parents and I had fled a war zone and its aftermath. My mother, university graduate at the peak of her career, but upon arrival, we had to start from scratch. And it is through this overnight loss of our sense of selves and belonging in this world that came to shape my critical reflections about that world order, about our politics on global migration, about how those politics influence migrant women. See, I was confronted with the aftermath of these migration policies at an early age, watched them push communities of color to the margins of society, and by margins I mean half of the kids I grew up with did not even know what pre-university levels were, and the other half just gave up before trying, given our socio-economic context. So a desire to understand these processes of exclusion has characterized my life ever since. This longing for a deeper understanding of our identity and place in society is called acculturation. Acculturation is a social-political concept that explains what happens when a minority group joins a majority culture and loses parts of its own. And aside from culture, loss can also be experienced in terms of livelihood, in terms of socioeconomics. My university graduated mom who have to work day and night shifts, who had to work a minimum wage job to provide for our family. So a large part of my own existence has revolved around this search for an identity. One poet, Ijoma Umewunyo, calls diaspora blues. We're the diaspora, we're Too foreign for home, we're too foreign for here, which may make us never enough for both. In the context of globalization and a globalized refugee crisis, more and more first, second, and third generation immigrant kids will come to experience acculturation. See, hours before that scene at the Dutch airport, I was standing in front of my grandmother's Canggugu home, looked up to her face as we said goodbye. I was holding, no, squeezing her hand really tight as if I knew what would come next. My grandmother, who named me Munganyende, she whose voice cannot go unheard. My grandmother then gently pressed my baby brother against my mother's chest, turned to me with eyes that said, Mwana wanje, dear child of mine, when you get to the other side of that ocean, you will have to start working twice as hard to get half of what others get. My parents would come to raise me with lips that repeated the same. But twice as hard to get half of what others get, I didn't even know who those others were, and I most certainly did not know what made me so different from them. But it was almost immediately upon arrival that my own naivete made more room around my perceived otherness. It became clear to me. It was my first day at school. I had attended kindergarten in French in Rwanda, but my tongue had quickly adapted to learn clicking at the rhythms of this new Dutch language. I was telling my new classmates my name. Munganyende, rolled my tongue and bended it with pride. When I finished introducing myself, my new teacher looked up, surprised, and said, Christelle, if I were to close my eyes, I think you were a real Dutch girl. I went home super confused. See, becoming Dutch in a European context does not equal becoming white, like my elementary school teacher thought. To me, acculturation rather means thriving within the geographic context that we were given at arrival. Today, as a political scientist who conducts research on the position of Africans in Europe, I've come to realize the significant impact African descendants have had on the European continent throughout centuries. Today, I count 24 vibrant years of life between Kigali, Eindhoven, Amsterdam, Paris, and Brussels. I have indeed become Afropean. But along that path, I've come to realize how dangerous these microaggressions are, such as my elementary school teacher told me to immigrant kids and their acculturation process. My writing has centered around this awareness. I know now that forging an Afropean identity is a political act. It is one that allows for the existence of African communities in the European imagination. What it means is that we collectively allow ourselves to imagine that regardless of the place we may call home, we exist to thrive even in displacement. When I close my eyes, you almost become like a real Dutch girl was said. What I heard is, black girl, you are to be heard but not to be seen. Reflecting back on it makes me realize how the Dutch gaze, so the cultural perception we have of being Dutch, of being European, had never allowed for my background as an immigrant and a feeling of belonging to coexist. But I am to be seen. We are to be seen. Black girl, black woman, black femme, you are to be seen. With a face estranged from the motherland, here am I, daughter of the country of 1,000 hills, rerouted to the land of none. Here am I. I am alive. I am resilient. I have become Afropean. I am Munganyende, acculturated. I am not rootless. I am free.